What is going on, everybody? In today's video, we will be breaking down some deep sleepers currently in fantasy football drafts for the 2024 fantasy football season. We are talking the late round selections in this video. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to reference a real fantasy football draft that I did through Underdog and go through every round from round 11 all the way to round 18 and choose one player that was selected in each round, tell you why I think they are a great sleeper. And right now in most redraft leagues, these are guys that you can get really late in your mock drafts, and these are also players that are still great selections late in Underdog fantasy football at the current moment. So let's not waste any time. Let's hop right into today's video and talk about some sleepers. In round 11, I'm going to start the video off with Jerome Ford of the Cleveland Browns, a player that I have been drafting quite a bit throughout the offseason, a player that I actually literally drafted in this draft that we are using for reference today. So Jerome Ford, I believe, is going to start the season as the RB1 for the Cleveland Browns. I don't think Nick Chubb is going to be ready to start the season as the RB1 for the Cleveland Browns. And overall, I am worried about when Nick Chubb is actually going to be able to be ready to take the field and play, right? So Jerome Ford, when we look at things last year, was the RB16 in full PPR, had 9 total touchdowns, had a nose for the end zone throughout the season when he got opportunities. And don't forget, Kareem Hunt vultured a ton of touchdowns from Jerome Ford last year. And I do think there's, somewhat of a chance that Donta Foreman is involved at the goal line, and there's a little bit of that effect this year. But I think Jerome Ford is the better overall running back. And right now, I mean, you're getting him so late. He's at an ADP of 127.9 on Underdog, an ADP of 125.2 on the Sleeper app. You can draft Jerome Ford easily as an RB4, an RB3, sometimes even an RB5, depending on your build. So once again, a deep sleeper. You don't have to spend a ton of draft capital on him. I think he is a great value. Depending on Nick Chubb's recovery, you might be drafting an RB1 in the double-digit rounds right now in fantasy football drafts. Get some shares of Jerome Ford. It is going to pay off. All right, next up for round 12, I'm going to go with Jahan Dotson, currently at an ADP of 138.8 on Underdog and an ADP of 153.5 on the Sleeper app. A very disappointing sophomore season for Jahan Dotson, who had a good rookie season, but regressed last year from 7 touchdowns to 4 touchdowns and still finished with just 518 receiving yards overall. So I do like Dotson this year because I think this offense is going to be very different with Cliff Kingsbury as the offensive coordinator, Jaden Daniels at the quarterback position. We've got, Austin Eckler added to the backfield, Ben Sinnott at the tight end position with Zach Ertz. Overall, obviously, Terry McLaurin is going to be the wide receiver 1 for this team, but I think Dotson is in a good place to kind of get closer to what he did in his rookie season, where we saw some nice upside out of him, some nice contested catches, more overall touchdown upside in that rookie season than last year. I think he'll have the chance just to get back on track. So definitely a player who can bring a lot of upside to the table. And once again, we're looking at deep sleepers here. You're getting Jahan Dotson so late in your draft, so you can draft him as a wide receiver 5, 6, or 7. It's not hurting your draft if he does not turn out to be a player of high caliber. He can go right back to the waiver wire. So Dotson, wide receiver 2 for the Commanders right now. I think he is worth the selection where he is going in drafts. All right, for round 13, I'm going with Chuba Hubbard, currently an ADP of 161.8 on Underdog, an ADP of 137.6 on the Sleeper app. This is a player that right now, at the time I'm recording this, I would really encourage you guys to go out and draft. I've been talking about Chuba Hubbard off and on throughout the whole offseason, and when you look at things, tough snap competition, quote unquote, for Chuba Hubbard. Obviously, the Carolina Panthers went out and drafted Jonathan Brooks at the running back position. This is the guy that they are drafting to be the RB1 for this offense. But as of right now, there is no timetable for Jonathan Brooks' return, right? He tore his ACL his last year of college. Jonathan Brooks might not be ready to go till mid-season. And when he is ready to go, it might still take a couple weeks for Jonathan Brooks to really become the main guy in this offense. Last year, it was Chuba Hubbard versus Miles Sanders, and Chuba Hubbard destroyed that backfield competition. Chuba Hubbard was a player weeks 12 through 18 in fantasy football last year who had double digits every single one of those games. Okay. It's not a huge upside pick or anything, but I do think the Carolina Panthers offense, as you guys have heard me talk about throughout the offseason, will be improved this year under new head coach Dave Canales, but that's besides the point. I mean, once again, this is a deep sleeper pick. You're drafting Chuba Hubbard as your RB5 or 6, depending on your build. It's a smash selection. He's going to start the season as the RB1 for the Carolina Panthers. In my opinion, similar to Jerome Ford with the Cleveland Browns, he is an excellent deep sleeper to start targeting, and you need to do so right now because I think as more news about Jonathan Brooks and his, recovery comes out, Chuba Hubbard's going to rise a little bit in mock drafts and underdog drafts. So get some shares of him while you can. All right, for round 14, I went with Demarcus Robinson. You guys know if you've been following the channel throughout the offseason, I can't make a sleeper video without talking about Demarcus Robinson. He has an ADP of 168.2 on Underdog. He has an ADP of 223.7 on the sleeper app, Overall, this is actually literally, I have to admit, my most drafted player in Underdog Fantasy because I am just so consistently taking Demarcus Robinson as a wide receiver 6, 7, or 8 that it ends up happening almost every single draft. And I have watched Demarcus Robinson's ADP rise throughout the entire offseason. To start the offseason, he was closer to an ADP of like 182 on Underdog, and there are times where he goes between picks like 158 and 161, mainly because Matthew Stafford's ADP on Underdog is right around 150, and people just kind of get that late round stack or build upon like a Puka / Cup Matthew Stafford stack early in drafts. But overall, listen, for Demarcus Robinson, okay, this is the wide receiver 3 for the Rams. Something happens to Puka, something happens to Cup, Robinson will step in and be the wide receiver 2 right away. Go back to last year when Demarcus Robinson got going in this offense between weeks 13 and week 17, double digits every single game with a ceiling of 20 fantasy points, 4 touchdowns in those games. So even with Puka and Cup on the field, I still believe that Demarcus Robinson is going to be a viable receiving option for Matthew Stafford. He is going to be more involved in this offense this year. And at the rate you are drafting him, at the draft capital that you have to spend on him, you're not missing anything if everything I just said doesn't turn out to be true, right? So Demarcus Robinson is a great player in PPR mock drafts to take as your final selection and a great player to take late in underdog drafts currently. Get some shares of him because, like I said, his ADP has been moving up all off season long. Do not forget that throughout the week, I run several live streams where I show you guys how I am currently conducting Underdog Fantasy Football drafts, where I go round by round, give you guys the best advice as to how I am currently drafting, how I am currently putting together teams, putting together different builds, who I like each round, everything that you guys need to know. And do not forget that Underdog Fantasy is still running the most competitive drafts of the offseason for the remainder of the offseason. Best Ball Mania, there's still plenty of room to get in the biggest fantasy football tournament of the offseason for your chance to win up to $1.5 million. Don't forget, use promo code The Catch. The link is down below. If you are new to Underdog and you want to start drafting right away, you will get a first time 50% deposit match up to $250 plus a free bonus mystery pick'em. If you do not want to wait any longer to start drafting fantasy football teams, you don't have to. Use that link down below and start hopping into underdog drafts with me and the rest of the community as soon as possible. For round 15, I went with rookie wide receiver Malachi Corley. There are some other names in this round I like: Cade Otton, Baker Mayfield, another rookie wide receiver in Troy Franklin. I think Rashad Bateman is a player I like to get some shares of. Michael Wilson's intriguing, but I find myself drafting a lot of Malachi Corley, or at least I have found myself drafting a lot of Malachi Corley lately. In underdog drafts, he has an ADP of 180.7 on Underdog, an ADP of 185.8 on the sleeper app. So this is, pure speculation here. When we look at this Jets roster, right? Garrett Wilson's locked in as that wide receiver 1, and it kind of looks like it's pretty obvious that the Jets drafted Malachi Corley to be the wide receiver 2 on this offense. Allen Lazard is the next best receiving option at wide receiver. They're pretty thin at wide receiver overall. We know Breece Hall is going to catch some passes. Rookie Braylon Allen at the running back position maybe catches some passes here. Tyler Conklin is involved, I guess, at tight end, but someone's going to have to step up on an Aaron Rodgers-led offense. Now, some people are going to argue Aaron Rodgers does not really target rookies, has trouble getting chemistry going with rookies, but this is a make it or break it season for this entire Jets team. He doesn't really have an option. And Malachi Corley is just a unique kind of player when you look at what he did at Western Kentucky as a receiver, kind of like a Deebo Samuel or like a younger Kadarius Toney before the debacles he's had with the Chiefs. But there's upside here is the main point, right? And I think when you're drafting, especially in underdog drafts so late, you want to pick wide receivers who present upside. Plus, he's also in line for a large potential of volume, being the wide receiver 2, in theory, for the New York Jets. So the upsides here, he's a talented player, a unique style of wide receiver profile for Malachi Corley, and he's in an offense that's going to be much more improved this year with Aaron Rodgers being fully healthy. I'm taking shots on Malachi Corley in round 15 as a late round wide receiver sleeper. In round 16, a couple names I like here. I do like Dameon Pierce. He actually usually goes a little bit later, but I think he's a great handcuff to grab late, who's going to be in a good offense. Joe Mixon, a little bit older. I kind of like Tyler Boyd. I think he's okay where he goes in drafts. You got Khalil Herbert. Interesting name, interesting situation for him. He might get traded, might not. Is a good handcuff to Swift. And I do like Ben Sinnott of the Washington Commanders as well. But ultimately, here in round 16, I'm going with quarterback Bryce Young. Currently has an ADP of 195.1 on Underdog. And then when we go over to the Sleeper app, if you are doing PPR mock drafts, you probably aren't seeing Bryce Young drafted. He has an ADP of 218.4. But if you are in a Superflex format or a double quarterback format, then I think it's important to pay attention to Bryce Young in redraft this year. And I think Bryce Young is a steal in underdog drafts as well. When we go back to that rookie season last year, bad. 11 touchdowns, 10 picks, no rushing touchdowns, just under 2,900 passing yards. I get it. Bad. Offensive line was bad. It improved over the offseason. This offense got better in the draft and free agency. Deontay Johnson's here, Xavier Leggett, Jonathan Brooks down the stretch. We also have rookie tight end Ja'Tavion Sanders. Adam Thielen's going to be able to play maybe a little bit more openly, even though he wasn't anything bad last year. He's just like no defensive pressure on Thielen now with Johnson and Leggett lining up out there. So offense on paper looks better, but also new head coach Dave Canales coming from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Just did great things with Baker Mayfield. The year before did great things with the Seattle Seahawks and Geno Smith. Anyone can say Bryce Young, pull him out of this awful rookie season he just had, which for the record, this is not the first time a rookie quarterback has had a bad rookie season. Bryce Young was still the #1 overall selection for a reason, right? And overall, you're just paying such little draft capital on him, right? A lot of these Carolina Panthers players go late in drafts. So, we already talked about Chuba Hubbard today, but even guys like Deontay Johnson, Xavier Leggett, Adam Thielen, Ja'Tavion Sanders doesn't even get drafted all the time, which I want to hold our horses on a rookie tight end, but I think it's okay to get some shares of him, right? And even Jonathan Brooks is still a later round running back, right? So it is really easy in underdog to get a late round kind of secondary third stack on your team with Bryce Young and a Carolina Panthers wide receiver or 2. But overall, if you're just going for a quarterback, whether you're in an underdog draft, whether you are in a super flex format, a double quarterback format, and even arguably in a single quarterback format, I do think there's the potential that Bryce Young has improved enough that down the stretch, he might be like a streaming option in single quarterback leagues this year. So just a guy being completely blown off after a bad rookie season in a much, much better situation this year. There are a lot of fantasy football experts out there talking about this Carolina Panthers offense going into the season for good reason. This team is not going to be as bad offensively as it was last year. They will be much improved. And Bryce Young right now, a true sleeper in fantasy football drafts. All right, in round 17, a couple names I like. I think DJ Chark is a decent selection. You've got some interesting tight ends, and that brings me to a tight end that I really like in this round who actually usually goes a little bit earlier. Chicken Conquo at pick 204 in this draft has an ADP of 189.5 on the Underdog app. And when we go to the Sleeper app, my guy Chig, who I have been drafting quite a bit of, has an ADP of 184.2. So this is a player I think in redraft might end up more like a streaming option, waiver wire pickup, but an Underdog, I think he's certainly worth the selection, right? 77 targets last year, 54 receptions, 528 receiving yards, and 1 touchdown. So when you actually break things down, right, Will Levis last year got his first start in week 8 against Atlanta. When we look at Chicken Conquo between weeks 8 and week 18, he had 9.4 or more fantasy points 3 times and a 8.5 finish in there as well. So those aren't great numbers, but he at least hit double digits once, had a touchdown with Will Levis at the quarterback position, and he started to see more momentum, more targets out of Chicken Conquo as the season went on from Will Levis, and a better average overall target rate for Chicken Conquo. So the Tennessee Titans, another offense that I think is just kind of being slept on moving into next year, right? Tony Pollard added to this backfield with Tajay Spears. Calvin Ridley added to the wide receiver room alongside Tyler Boyd with DeAndre Hopkins. I think Chicken Conquo, who is a talented receiving tight end, is being completely slept on. I mean, remember, after that 2022 season where he had 450 receiving yards and 3 receiving touchdowns, Chicken Conquo last offseason was a popular kind of late round sleeper tight end guy that a lot of people talked about, and I haven't heard him be hardly talked about at all this offseason. So I'm taking shares of him in Underdog. I don't think in redraft you necessarily need to go out and draft him, but I do think he could be a player that pops up on the waiver wire and is a viable streaming option, especially in full PPR format. So keep an eye on Chig throughout the season. And if you're drafting in best ball drafts, I certainly think he's worth a selection as a tight end 3. Or if you have punted, kind of went hero tight end, got one tight end early, you need to get someone late, I think Chicken Conquo is a great selection. All right, which now brings us to round 18. There are some players that I kind of like in this range. I've been drafting Odell Beckham, especially if I've drafted Tua. I like Colby Parkinson, who actually went in round 17 of this draft. If you drafted Matthew Stafford, which that's actually my team, and that's exactly what happened. There are names here. I think Darius Slayton's okay. I think Derek Carr and Russell Wilson being completely forgotten about. There's going to be somebody here in the 18th round that you can draft that you have to make an argument for yourself, right? But I'm going to go with running back Roshan Johnson. Okay, we kind of mentioned Khalil Herbert earlier. There's some, murmurs that Khalil Herbert might get traded to another team. There's murmurs that this is going to be a 3-headed committee backfield with DeAndre Swift in front. There are murmurs that it's going to end up just being Roshan Johnson and DeAndre Swift. No matter what it is, there is the chance that DeAndre Swift suffers an injury this year. We've seen that happen in the past. I'm a DeAndre Swift truther, don't get me wrong, but Roshan Johnson, I think, is a decent handcuff and kind of a running back room that's a little bit viable at the moment, because it's not like Khalil Herbert has stayed fully healthy throughout his career as well. He missed time last year. He missed time in 2022 as well. We know Roshan Johnson coming out of Texas was a great prospect at the running back position in his rookie season. Just 2 touchdowns, 352 rushing yards. But he did have a couple games where he got involved in terms of receiving work, 34 receptions, 209 receiving yards for Roshan Johnson. He also had a big week 1, and that confused a lot of people. Then he completely fell off for most of the season, but he actually had 3 other double-digit fantasy performances. And guess what? Those double-digit fantasy performances, for the most part, stemmed from his receiving work. So Roshan Johnson, we're in the 18th round here. Good enough handcuff. Maybe a guy that gets involved even if Swift and or Herbert are healthy. Definitely a running back who could get involved at the right time and kind of take over in terms of volume as the season goes on. So in the 18th round, I think he's worth a selection. You probably don't need to go out and get him in redraft. mock drafts right now, but keep an eye on him in underdog formats. I think he's worth a shot. And that'll do it for today's video. Let me know what you guys thought of today's list. Let me know in the comments down below what sleepers you guys have been targeting in your current mock drafts or your real fantasy football drafts. And of course, if you guys have any fantasy football questions, redraft, dynasty, or best ball, let me know down below and I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. With that, I will say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.